Hi writers, it's Mrs. Everly. Today we're really going to be focusing on how you guys can draft a story and really thinking about the structure of a story. The last few lessons we have taken a list of brainstormed memories that we did. We drafted a story across our hands. We sketched it in our notebooks. You guys drafted that story, and then yesterday you really focused on picking out an important part of a story and asking yourself, could I add more details to this? So you reread and then you revise that story. And again, in my example, I really focused on my verbs and I really focused on what my senses. Like, what did I see? What did I hear? And then can I use those details to help me, help my reader envision exactly what happened in my memory? So like I said, today we're going to be talking about the structure of a story. And usually in narrative pieces of writing, there's 3 parts to a story. Okay? The first part is where the trouble begins. So where it starts, okay? So like when you think about this memory, where does it start playing in your mind? Is it at the beginning of a day? Is it at the end of the day? Was it a certain part, in my story, it was during my read aloud block. So again, where does the trouble start? And then where does the second part is, where does the trouble get worse? So again, that trouble that you were thinking of, how does the trouble get worse? And the third part and the final part of the story is, how is the trouble resolved? Okay, and when we talk about resolved is, how is it solved? Sometimes it's a happy ending and we put a pretty little bow on it, and sometimes it's not a happy ending. Okay, so I'm going to model my story using these 3 parts or this structure to a piece of writing. So if you guys remember, on my first page, or where my first part is where the trouble starts, and that is when Mrs. Buskey is entering my room. And again, we don't have doors, but she's walking into my room and I can see that she's mad. Her face is red. You can see that she's mad. Her hands are on her hip, okay? So that's where my trouble begins, is when a teacher comes in my room and you can tell it's not to talk. She doesn't have a smile on her face. You can tell she's mad, okay? The second part to my story is where the trouble gets worse. So she yells at us. So Mrs. Buskey yells at us. She tells us we need to be quiet. We're being too loud. She's trying to teach. Her kids are trying to learn. And I'm thinking to myself, what is she talking about? My students are, what is she talking about? We just sat down. We just got out our journals. You haven't even started reading. So again, you guys, that's where the trouble gets worse because we're confused. We don't know what she's talking about. And eventually on my last page, how does the story end? How does the trouble get resolved? And honestly, it didn't really get resolved because I had no idea what she was talking about. So the way that we resolved the problem was I changed the locations of my room where I did read aloud that year, but I also really talked about like expectations when we were on the carpet, and when my class was on the carpet, it very much was very close to her classroom. So we really talked about how we could use our quiet voices during read aloud. So that seemed to help with the noise levels, but it wasn't kind of a pretty ending to my story. But again, you guys, it's very clear to my reader that I have 3 parts to my story. So this is what you guys are going to do. You're going to think of a new story. So you can think of something, so maybe my story triggered something, of an experience you had. You could take another memory that you guys brainstormed and you guys could write about that. You guys can write about anything, but again, it needs to be about yourself and something that has happened to you. And what I want you guys to do is think about it with a partner. So if you guys could talk about this memory with a mom or a dad or a grandma or a grandpa or a sister or a brother or a babysitter or a daycare teacher. Whoever you guys can talk to, I want you guys to kind of talk out this story. And I want you guys to, when you're telling this story to your partner, I want you guys to think about how you guys could tell it in those 3 parts. And once you guys tell it to the person, I want you then, your partner, to tell you that story in 3 parts. And then once you guys have kind of taken turns in this, then guess what? I want you guys to write it. Now, here's the thing. If you guys can't think or if you guys don't have a partner, then just do it with a stuffed animal. That's totally fine. Or tell the story in the mirror to yourself. And then I want you guys to write it down. So again, your homework today is to draft a new story. But before you start drafting it, I want you guys to think about the 3 parts. And if you guys look here, I just wrote my first page. So I wrote my first page, and then I have my second page, and then I have my third page. You could even do like a 1, a 2, and a 3. Totally up to you. But I want you to think about it in those 3 parts. And I'm going to remind you of those 3 parts. So where does the trouble start? The second part is how does the trouble get worse? And the third part is how is it resolved? How is the trouble resolved? All right, goodbye.